Hi, my name is Chris Cole. I live in Brooklyn, New York by way of Rancho Cucamonga, California, and my film is called Getaway. So Getaway is a dramatic comedy about a guy named Mike. Mike is a recent journalism school grad, originally from the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn. He spent 4 years away from home at school, virtually ignoring all the friends and family that he grew up with, but he returns to New York to write for this seedy publication called Strife. Mike doesn't really like writing for Strife and views himself as a much more serious journalist, and because of this he butts heads with his boss Devin a lot. But when Devin threatens to fire Mike, Mike reluctantly agrees to take on this assignment to drive an Uber through Bed-Stuy for a night. The idea is that he'll write about it as a sort of messed up form of cultural tourism. While on the drive, Mike picks up his estranged best friend Charlie, and they unwittingly become getaway drivers for a bank robbery. Now, I don't want to say too much about what happens next because you're going to have to see it for yourself. But when I was writing this film, I took a lot of cues from these classic 80s buddy comedy movies like 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy. I think those movies do a great job of setting up this kind of odd couple dynamic where it's two people who are very different from each other who kind of have to reconcile their differences in order to work towards a common goal. And that's the dynamic I wanted to set up between Mike and Charlie. But the reason I think that BET networks and Paramount Players should make this movie is not just because it's this funny buddy comedy, but also it asks some larger questions. I've been a resident of Brooklyn the past couple years, and I've witnessed how much has changed because of gentrification and just what an interesting landscape that is. And that's part of what this story is about. But at its core, the story is about relationships and people growing apart from each other. And between Mike and Charlie, it really asks this question: how could two people who grew up so close to each other end up going on such divergent paths? I think that filmmaking is such a strong medium because it allows us glimpses into lives and worldviews and experiences that we may not otherwise have, yet at the same time it reaffirms how we're all similar in our stories on our respective journeys. For this same reason, one of my favorite black films of all time is Boys in the Hood. I actually saw this movie for the first time recently on an airplane, and it really shook me how much I could see myself in the characters. I grew up in suburban Los Angeles, about as far away from the hood as possible, yet there was something very beautiful and human about the struggles and the stories that these characters had that I couldn't help but see myself in the film. And even if I hadn't experienced something like this firsthand, I definitely knew a lot of friends and family who did. Another thing that really struck me about that film is I'm a big hip-hop fan, and it actually, while watching it, I realized it had a huge influence on one of my favorite albums of all time, Good Kid, Mad City by Kendrick Lamar. I think it was really interesting to see how Kendrick took some narrative cues from that film and incorporated them into the story of the album. And on top of everything, I discovered that John Singleton was 23 when he directed that movie, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. And whenever I see work from black people and people who look like me, and black men and women, or even just people of color in general, I just think it's great and really sets a precedent for what I'm trying to do. I'm Chris Cole, and for me, Project Create means giving a voice to the voiceless. Follow my journey and check out the hashtag Project Create.